Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Sushan.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are staying in San Diego, and our topics this week are media relations, crisis communications, and also news reporting. Our guest this week is Carlos Delgado. He attended San Diego State from 1991 through 1996. And the great part about Carlos is that he's done a little bit of everything. He knows what it's like to be a news reporter. He knows what it's like to work on the PR side of things. I can definitely relate to Carlos, not just because we went to school at the exact same time, but I've also done a lot of back and forth zigging and zagging in my career as well. These days, Carlos works for Rady Childrens Hospital. He is the Bilingual Senior Media Relations and Public Information Officer. Carlos, welcome to the Where You At podcast.
Josh, thanks for having me, man. SDSU, proud Aztecs, right?
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. Carlos and I go back to the Marshall Faulk era. A wonderful time. Individually for him, not so much for the team. We don't need to get into that stuff. But let's start with this, Carlos. You have, again, you've done the reporting side. You've done the PR side. I want to start with a couple of things about what you do right now, and then we're going to rewind. Say there's a student who can't quite make up their mind. Maybe it's news, maybe it's PR, maybe they're still trying to figure it out. What would be your advice in terms of how you know what's best when you're trying to decide which side of this communications aisle to work on?
Well, communication has changed since you and I were in school a long, long time ago. I won't even say how long ago, but I think you've already said it, right? But whether it's television news, journalism, print, or whether you want to get into the PR side, it all blends in at the end of the day because one leads to another. In fact, someone just asked me the other day, well, how did you get into PR? Well, because I had the journalism side, right? And I decided to pursue that career. But I never want to discourage anyone from really pursuing what their dreams are. For example, I wanted to be a TV reporter. I gave it all my 110% and I made it. I succeeded. But sometimes people will say, no, you can't do it. You should pursue this. You have to pursue what you think you want to do. That's the advice I always give because the news industry has changed and it's very complicated and different from when you and I were getting into that industry, right? There's really no money in it. There's no money in it today. And they're hiring younger and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. But don't let that discourage you. If you really want to get into that profession, just do it because you don't want to regret it later and say, well, I should have been a television news reporter when you got into PR. It all works together eventually. Eventually you can get out and do PR and get into TV news, but do what your heart says. SDSU is a red school. It's what your heart says, right? I really want to thank San Diego State, though, because I wouldn't be where I'm at now if it wasn't for San Diego State. I had some amazing instructors. I could name them.
Name them. Absolutely. Tell us about those names.
And I'm so sad to see that guy retire just a few years ago. The late Dr. Bloom, Joe Spivak. I don't know if Joe is still around, but he was an amazing man. I still remember him. I remember we were still on typewriters back then. I'm kind of dating myself. Dr. Buckaloo. There was just so many. I think there was Dr. Lawson, Cliff Albert. There were so many people that just really impacted my life to where I'm at now. And, Cliff Albert, for example, is at one of the local radio stations here in San Diego. And I go to his radio station once in a while through my job at Rady Childrens, and I'll do interviews for medical stuff that they need. And I go back and remember him back in the 90s when he was my broadcast instructor. And, we sit there and like, wow, that was such a long time ago in that PSFA building. I don't even know if that building is still there. I haven't gone to that side of campus. But I do remember these instructors 25, 30 years later because they really had an impact on me and they really guided me and helped me to get to where I'm at. And I'm very thankful for the program that SDSU has developed over the years. I know that the folks there now are trying to do the best they can to really make it one of the top in the country. It's a great program.
If you could give advice to 18-year-old Carlos, based on especially what you just told us about the professors and the impact it had, what would be the advice to 18-year-old self about what the future holds and what the possibilities exist?
That's a great question because you've got to listen to these professors. They have, some of them have been in the industry, were in the industry, are still in the industry, and they know what it's like to get into this industry. And it's all about networking. It's all about knowing the right people. At the time, I remember Tim Wolfmeyer. He was still doing some stuff at Channel 8 back in the days. And I think his wife, Lori, was still doing stuff at Channel 8. But these people are the ones that will get you to where you need to go if you really apply yourself, if you give it the 110%, because you also have to do your part. It's not going to come to your hand and they're not going to spoon feed you, say, here, you can go be a reporter and market 170. I mean, you have to work hard to get to where you need to start. And that's, these small markets. But these professors can network you with the right people. I think SDSU is really working on trying to develop a networking, a mentoring program. Those are all important, I think, Josh, to really get your career started. Because if you don't get involved in some of these organizations and groups and meet the right people, we're Aztec for life. We need to be helping each other out.
When you mentioned Professor Wolfmeyer's name, you just reminded me of something that I'd forgotten. And so I'm glad that this came to mind. And I don't remember the exact details of how it occurred, but I know that I was in his office, Professor Wolfmeyer's office, and there was something that had arrived to him, which was an opportunity to go to the Poynter Institute, which is in St. Petersburg, Florida. And it was this week-long gathering of some of the best college student journalism minds in the country, but you had to apply for it, and you needed a professor that would write you some type of letter of recommendation, and you had to fill out this entire application. And so I said, Wolfie, we called him Wolfie, and I said, Wolfie, will you write this? And he said that he would. And him and I always kind of had this thing where I didn't quite know exactly where I stood with him, because he liked to pick on me in class, but I think he did that because he thought that I could take it or something like that. And so I remember I said, okay, thank you for telling me about this. I want to apply for this. And he said, okay, I'll write you a letter. And so when he wrote the letter, he refused to let me read the letter that he wrote. He put it in an envelope, and then he closed it, and he signed his signature across it so that I couldn't open it. And he said, just include this in your application. So I have no idea what was on there, but I think hopefully he said nice things about me. But I ended up getting this. It was like a seminar for a week long. It was incredible. I learned so much at the Poynter Institute. And I just tell this story to piggyback off your sentiment about talk to your professors, get to know them. There's things that they know about that can lead to these great opportunities for you.
Well, you mentioned that letter that he wrote, that letter of recommendation that we used to call it, right? He wrote me one too for scholarship. And I asked him, I remember going into his office on that second or third floor, and I was like, knocking on his door, and I was afraid to ask him because, he was a tough guy. He was just one of those guys that you said, it's just, you didn't really know how he felt about you, because he was just a hard guy to figure out and understand. But he wrote me a letter of recommendation. He did the exact same thing. He put it in an envelope, and he says, do not open it. Send it with your packet. I said good things about you. I do remember that, but I think that's one of those things that he kind of just did to everyone. But, I can't thank him enough. I wish I had that opportunity to see him again. I haven't seen him in a few years. I would go back to his class and guest speak. He would call me every semester. And it was like, and I do miss that. I really do miss that, because he's just a nice guy. Too bad he had to retire. I mean, it's part of life, but Tim Wolfmeyer did have a major impact. Buckaloo had a major impact. Spivak had all these guys that I just remember. They were just amazing people, and they shaped me and helped guide me to where I am now.
I want to ask you about one of the parts of your job title, because I think it was important when we were students, and it's even more important now, and that is that you are bilingual senior media relations. Tell us what languages you grew up speaking at the home, at school, with friends, and any formal classes that you took so that you could become bilingual.
Well, I grew up in San Diego, and I grew up in Logan Heights. So, I grew up growing up, I spoke Spanish and at home, and it was when I went to school, I went to Point Loma High School. So I got bused to Point Loma High School as a magnet student. So I took Spanish classes there. So that really shaped my Spanish and really got it to para que hable perfectamente el español, ¿verdad? Tú no hablas español, ¿o sí? ¿Hablas español? Un poquito?
Un poquito español.
Yeah, I speak Spanish, and I'm very thankful that I really was able to take my minors in Spanish at San Diego State, so I was able to take, Spanish classes, continue developing that language, so that because I knew that was important, I really wanted to be a reporter in California, and I was one of those few lucky ones that was able. My first job, as you know, was in Yuma, and but I covered the news in the Imperial Valley, El Centro, California, like the hottest place in the world, right? But then I worked in places like Fresno, Sacramento, Los Angeles, Palm Springs, San Diego. So I was one of those lucky ones because of my Spanish skills. If you know another language, take advantage of it. Continue studying that language so that you can easily get a job in this industry.
Even if someone did not grow up speaking Spanish, what is the importance nowadays for students to be able to speak both English and Spanish at whatever type of communication job they end up getting?
You asked me a very good question. Spanish is obviously good because we're in California, right, Josh? But any language, because there's so many cultures that live in California. So if you want to get into the PR industry, wow, having Spanish, having another language as a skill is really going to put you out there. If you want to be a reporter and work in along border towns, work in cities where there are Spanish speakers, it's really going to help you, right? It's a plus. You're going to be ahead of the game for those folks who don't know another language, and that's what people are looking for nowadays. We have to be inclusive of our communities and have people who look and sound like the people in our communities.
I'll also add this. If anyone wants to work in baseball, you better study Spanish. And I will confess, I said earlier, hablo un poquito español. My biggest regret as a student is that I did not study Spanish to become an expert bilingual. I did enough to pass the class. If there is anything that I wish that I could do differently, it's that I would have focused on the Spanish classes the same way that I focused on my journalism classes, the same way that I focused at the Daily Aztec, because especially as someone who works in baseball, with the quantity of Spanish-speaking players that we have where that's their first language, it is vital. If you wanted baseball, soccer, like Carlos just said, border towns, got to know both.
It's a plus. I remember when I wrote for the Daily Aztec in the 90s, I did a lot of those Spanish groups. I wrote about different organizations that were making impact on campus that people didn't know about. And that's because I was able to speak to students in English and Spanish and get those stories. And even professionally, when I was in television markets across California, I was able to get people and stories that maybe my colleagues weren't able to get because I had that edge over them. Another language is obviously hard to pick up on, but if you can at least be able to manage it a little bit, understand it a little bit, it's going to help you out in your career. It's a plus.
So let's talk about the journalism, reporting, news part of your career. What were the stories that you just really enjoyed, where you just got out onto the scene and you just thought, this is why I'm doing this. This is what I love. This is the fun moments for me of being able to cover a story like this.
Well, I remember covering the 49ers when they were at training camp in Stockton. When I worked in Sacramento, I remember covering stories in Fresno, just stories that were making impact. I remember when they opened, if I don't remember the team, but when I worked in Fresno, they had a baseball stadium they opened up in downtown. I think it was the Fresno Grizzlies.
That's correct.
Yeah, the Fresno Grizzlies. They opened up that stadium in downtown Fresno. That's another story that I covered. I really wanted to be like you, Josh. I wanted to be a sports guy. I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer. Unfortunately, I didn't pursue that side of my career. I really did. I remember growing up and seeing Jim Laszlovic on television. He was a big-time, Charger, now turned sports guy who was a big guy. There's a guy that went to San Diego State, and him, Raj Mathai.
Yes.
My good friend Raj Mathai, who I worked with in two different markets, but I know he worked for the Chargers and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, I want to be like them. I want to be like a play-by-play announcer. I remember sitting in front of the television when I was a little kid and doing play-by-play in my own way, But unfortunately, I didn't pursue that side. I went into the news side of it, but I covered a lot of good stories, stories that made a difference in our community, investigative pieces, tragedy, which is, it's unfortunate, but it happens. So sometimes we have to report on that stuff, Josh, because it has an impact on the community, and I covered good stories, bad stories, and fun stories, interviewing. I went to school at Point Loma High School. You may remember this guy, J.J. Stokes. Remember him?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Back then, he was playing for the 49ers. Am I dating myself here a little bit, right? I remember when I was when I was working in Sacramento and I got the opportunity to go to training camp and interview some of these players, that was fun because it was my connection to a player that I went to high school with. And now I get to see professional Leroy Glover, who I went to high school with. These are just some of the names that I just remember as I was coming up, and I was able to see on the field as professional and professional on my side. So a lot of good stories, a lot of cool people, a lot of good friends, It's just like when I went to San Diego State, there are stories that I just don't forget about SDSU because now I can remember and say, wow, that's why that happened. Well, in my career, certain stories happened and now I still remember them. They have an impact on me 20 years later.
The older I get, the more I really get into the science of how to ask a question, the best way to ask questions in order to get the best response. When you were a reporter, what were your best tricks? What was your strategy for how to ask a question to get the best response?
You asked a very good question. You've got to remember that, when we're in journalism school, we're taught to ask questions and figure things out and how it impacts people and how it impacts you. So one of the things, when you're covering tragedy and stuff like that is empathy. You want to be empathetic to people because, they've lost a loved one or something tragic has happened. But you also want to, even if you're interviewing athletes, for example, and they lost a game because of this bad play, correct? Well, you also have to be sensitive to that stuff because they're human as well and they make mistakes, right? So just being empathetic, just don't want to do a story just because you want to be the top of the newscast or you want to lead the newscast because you got that exclusive. We could all get exclusives, but you just have to realize that you're interviewing people just like you, and you wouldn't want someone to put a microphone in your face and ask you that very difficult question. You kind of have to work your way into those kind of questions. And that takes years of practice. You learn that. That's why people go to little small markets like Amarillo, Texas, and El Paso, and Yuma, Arizona, and Bakersfield to really make those mistakes. Because when you get to the Los Angeles, you don't make those mistakes. You're a little bit more empathetic. You understand. If someone says, "No, I don't want to talk to you right now." If a celebrity, you're at a red carpet at an event and the celebrity is there, they don't want to talk to you. They just don't want to talk to you. You don't push it. You move on. It's not the end of the world. If I know sometimes producers will say, "I want that interview right now. You need to go interview this person." Well, they're not there. They're not in that environment, right? So you just have to make people understand, look, I won't be able to get that.
What about on the other side? Now that you are in PR, what is your strategy when, I don't know how often you get questions that may not be good questions, or maybe they're not very appropriate questions. Maybe they're just tough questions. What is your strategy on the other end when you're dealing with a reporter and the question doesn't maybe come out very, very well?
Well, that's a great question, Josh, because I was a reporter. And sometimes, I'm like, that's not the way I would ask that question. But let me phrase it this way for you. What you meant to say was this, right? Or are you looking for this as an answer? Because my skills in journalism really translate to the PR world. They really do. It's the same industry, except that on one side, you're writing stories or you're on television telling the story. On the other side, you're still doing the exact same thing, but now you have to protect your agency, your department, the company that you work for, right? Because it's all about reputation, branding, making sure they say your name right, all that good stuff. So when a reporter asks a question, you have to explain to them, look, I was a reporter too. I was in your shoes. I know what you're looking for. So maybe you might want to ask it this way. And my doctor, my expert might be able to answer it that way.
Well, speaking of branding, let's make sure that we get the branding correct. It is Rady Childrens Hospital. Tell us a little bit about the hospital and give us some details about what it is beyond this title of Bilingual Senior Media Relations and Public Information Officer. That's a big title. What do you do, Carlos?
Yeah. So branding, let me tell you, it's Rady Children's Hospital. We have an issue with branding at Rady Children's Hospital. Everyone calls us Rady's, but there's no S after Rady's, right? So it's an issue that we have been working on for the last 15 years. I've been there 16 years, but we just can't get that straight. So I told my boss the other day, we should just go Rady's, That's what everyone calls us. But no, that's a great question. I've been at Rady Children's as their PIO, Public Information Officer, for 16 years, going on 17 years. It's a great job. It's a great transition. I got there 2007. I was working at the Fox station in San Diego at the time. I was tired of being on the morning show. I was a morning show reporter, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I said, okay, I don't want to do this. Why don't I just do PR? I had no idea what PR is because I didn't study PR in college. I studied how to be on television. So I did the transition. It was a hard transition for the first 6 months, right? But 16 and a half years later, I've learned how to do PR. And I work at an amazing institution. We're the largest children's hospital in the West Coast. We're ranked number 8 in the whole entire country as a children's hospital. So we cover all what it appears to be in Southern California, Riverside, San Diego, and Imperial County. That is our region. We see over 200,000 kids every year that come to our facility. We are known for a lot of the things, cardiovascular surgery, orthopedics. So that's what we're known for. I deal a lot with media training. I do crisis communications on a daily basis. I pitch stories. Someone just asked me the other day, I was a guest speaker at a different college for a friend. And she says, well, do you still write press releases? I said, I don't think I've written a press release in 10 years. And that has to do with building relationships with different reporters and being able to know who is in your market, what reporters are here, following the news and figuring out what's happening and the dynamics of the news industry. As you know, Josh, it's changing, right? It used to be so hard to get in to work in San Diego and say, I'm going to be a sports guy in San Diego. It was difficult, right? Now it's a lot easier. People can get here because they're not paying enough money. But, it's a busy place and I really enjoy it. I'm saving lives in my own way. I'm not saving lives doing surgeries, like I say, but I'm saving lives by telling people stories and amazing stories of kids who have gone through some amazing obstacles, some crazy things that have happened in their lives. And now they're alive to share their stories, especially during the pandemic. We had so many kids that were hospitalized, we did a lot of work during the pandemic and a lot of things that we have done at Rady Children's. It's just a busy place. I call it like a mini little city.
When it comes to pitching stories, I want to get into some more details about this, especially if you have an example or two that you can give. Explain how you get this idea for the hospital, and then from there, how your mind works for who am I going to pitch this to and how am I going to pitch this story to this reporter?
That's a great question, because I've established relationships with many reporters in this town for the last 15, 16 years. I know what they want, what they're looking for. And so, for example, today, this is a good example. We just got new equipment for a disaster. So, for example, if we had an earthquake, right, we have a neonatal intensive care unit. That is a unit for premature babies. We just spent a lot of money getting a specialized equipment so that if there is an earthquake or a fire and we have to evacuate the hospital, we have this high-tech technology equipment that we can use immediately to evacuate the hospital without having to jeopardize their lives. So I'm like, wow, that's a great story. That's a visual story. Let's do some training where we can call some reporters on the morning show or a reporter like my good friend Joe Little at NBC and just be, hey, it's a visual story and they're going to come and cover it because it's visual and it impacts the community. So if you had a child in our NICU and our neonatal intensive care unit, and there was a disaster, we had to evacuate, we want the community to know that your child will be protected and in good hands. And so that's one of those stories that is dying to be told because, how do you evacuate a hospital when there's an earthquake or a fire, So now we have the technology, the equipment, and what we need to be able to keep kids alive and save lives. So that's just one of the stories that I can pitch. I can say, hey, that can go to this reporter because he's a multimedia journalist and he can tell a good story. Or this can go to, this reporter over at this station because it's visual and they can do several segments and be able to show what we're doing at Rady Children's.
Once the reporter says yes, okay, you've got this reporter, give us more details about when the reporter shows up. How are you involved? What do you do? How are you facilitating? How much are you getting out of the way? How much are you helping to make sure that the story comes out the way that you want it to turn out, but also so that the reporter is not getting in the way of sick babies?
Great question. Again, I manage everything from where they're going to park to make it easy for them to let's get into the hospital, easy access so that they can get what they need because they need to tell a visual story, whether it's print or television, having access to potentially a parent to be able to share what this means for them or a patient who can share their experience on television. So I coordinate all of that. I coordinate the physicians or the nurses who are going to be able to talk about what this equipment might mean for them and why it's important for them. I coordinate making it easy for them on where we're going to do the hits, the live shots, where we're going to take pictures. So as a PR specialist, as someone who does PR, you have to understand that I have to work with media to make it easy for them, because if I don't, then they're going to have a bad experience. For example, during Halloween, we just had window washers that came into the hospital. They climb on the windows and they're cleaning the windows, and the kids come to the windows and, they're high-fiving the window washers through the window, and they're taking pictures because it's a cool visual thing. And, there was a reporter that said, "Hey, can we go inside the hospital?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" And then, you ask the parents, "Hey, can your kid be on television? This is the cool video." "Sure. It's a good story." And that story has aired all across the country. So little things like that, you have to work as a PR guy. You have to understand the needs of the media, what the media wants, why they need that. And because of my experience as a reporter, when I dealt with PR folks, "Hey, I need this, I need that. Can we make it easy? I don't need to park 2 miles away and walk with my equipment. If I can just park in the front, get in, get out." I'm not micromanaging them, but I'm just kind of giving them the parameters. This is what you can and can't do. And because of the relationships, they understand. They're not going to burn me. I'm not going to burn them. We have a job to do.
I'm glad that you mentioned getting the parents' advice, because I had just written that down. That's a pretty easy story, right? Yeah, they're high-fiving. But what is your strategy when maybe there's a parent who has a really sick child and you don't know for sure exactly what's going to happen? Or how do you determine which parents am I going to talk to about their children to make sure that it's okay, and kind of guide them through the process of what an interview would be like?
Yeah, great question. It's all about empathy. These are sick kids. We're not using we're not using these kids for marketing purposes, right? We're using them to tell a story, and you approach your family just like I would someone who I want to interview. "Hey, I'm Carlos Delgado. I'm the PR guy at Rady Childrens. There's a TV station that wants to get your son on camera. Are you okay with that?" "Sure." Or, you can tell just by seeing the child that they're in a wheelchair, or, they're not looking too well. They're, possibly they have IV poles and stuff like that. They just want to get out of the room and experience the window washers. And those kind of kids, you just kind of move on and leave them alone, because they don't need that extra stress of a TV camera or two in front of their face just because the reporter needs to tell a story, So it's empathy again. These are children. They're sick children, kids who had heart transplants, kids who had broken bones, who are recovering from spine surgeries. We have it all. And so you just have to be cautious of what you're dealing with in the environment and what floor you're on, because at the end of the day, it's not about promoting or marketing the hospital or the kid, because that's not what we do. We just want to make sure that everyone has a positive experience. At the end of the day, I want to make sure that kid is happy and not sad because a camera was in his face and he was, put it on the news and now he's crying. So I try not to do that. I'm very, very cautious of that. I'm not a parent. I don't have any kids, but, I can only imagine what it's like when your kid is going through the worst and then someone wants to put a camera in your face. So I try to educate my reporter friends about that. I'm like, "Hey, we're going into the specialized unit. We just have to walk on thin ice, make sure we ask the right questions, and just be sensitive. If a parent says no, it's a no. We can't push it."
Well, when it comes to crisis management, crisis communications, hopefully nothing in our life is ever going to top COVID. And it's never going away, but that was a huge story, and that's an understatement of the world, a huge story. From a PR standpoint, I'm curious what your strategy was with your coworkers once you started to get a grasp on just how big this thing is, how much this is going to change our lives, and how you then respond in your job.
Well, it changed our lives, because even you and I talking right now, we would never be able to do these kind of interviews. It was like, "Oh, I've got to go interview Carlos in person, or, record him on the telephone." But now because of what has happened, the way COVID has changed the way we work, we can do Zoom interviews now, right? And it's kind of cool. COVID has really changed the way we do business now, right? Unfortunately, in the beginning of the pandemic, we were one of the first hospitals that got one of the first kids in the country that contacted COVID, came in contact with COVID. And I do remember that day. And I do remember that plane coming into the military base here at Miramar in California, where that first kid with COVID had to be hospitalized. And oh my God, what do we do? And where do we put this kid? And, what about infection? So I do remember all that. And I do remember that father doing Skype interviews. Do you remember that word, Skype?
Yes.
I don't even think we use that anymore, right, Josh? But Skype. Yeah, that dad was in that back room. And every time I give people a tour, I'm like, that room back there, that was the first interview where this father was doing Skype interviews because, the kid had COVID and they had to be isolated. And I remember my doctors going in and gowning up like Ghostbusters with the white outfits and the things on their head because, they were just afraid that if they came out, the whole world was going to be infected with COVID. But it just has changed the way we have done business. And, being one of the first hospitals to receive the vaccine in December of 2020, one of the first hospitals in the country really to start vaccinating our employees. I was one of the first few employees that got my vaccine in December of 2020. And it was scary because it was all new for us. We were all learning what this was. But I had to get into media mode because we had a lot of national media coming to Rady Children's. We were the first hospital to open the vaccine clinic in Southern California to give kids their vaccines when that started. But I had to get creative with my team. And one of the things that was very interesting, Josh, and people can Google it, but if you Google Rady Children's and canine therapy or therapy dogs and vaccines, I mean, it was incredible. The idea of like, why don't we bring our therapy dogs to the clinic? Because I remember being there and seeing kids crying. You remember when you got your shots when you were a kid, every kid cries, right? But these kids were like screaming and crying, and these parents were like anxious because this is new to them, right? So I'm like, why don't we get the therapy dogs in there? And that really calmed a lot of these kids. Well, sure enough, man, I was doing 400 media segments throughout the whole pandemic of national, international media coming to Rady Children's because of these therapy dogs that really made a difference. So we were known for having these therapy dogs in our vaccine clinic to really make the kids feel part of the process, right? Because we didn't want kids crying. And wow, as soon as those therapy dogs showed up, it was like a whole different kid. It's like they forgot that they were there to get a shot. But the pandemic really changed the way, all of us do business, even reporters do business, even PR people do business, because now we could do interviews via Zoom, or something that we couldn't do before.
I want to pause and just really commend you and your coworkers for the therapy dogs, because I think that it becomes a very subtle part of PR. Is it's not just pitching the story and helping execute, but it's not necessarily that you're creating the story, but you're just doing a good thing. You're just calming the nerves of kids and their parents. And I mean, nothing is a better visual for TV than a dog and a kid. But I think those are just the little things. It's not a little thing. It's a medium to large thing. In reality, even if it seems like it's a small thing, because of just the impact that it has. And I don't even know what the question is, other than just, I'm tipping my cap to you because of how something like that makes an impact. And you're helping tell the story in a way that makes people's lives better.
Well, remember I told you at the beginning, I said, I'm saving lives, but I'm saving lives on the PR way.
Yeah.
I'm not a nurse. I'm not like coming in direct contact with these kids and doing open heart surgeries. I'm not doing any of that. But if I could be able to help tell a story of a dog in a vaccine clinic, and another kid could see it, say, oh, that's not that bad. Mm-hmm. You've done your job. If I could tell a story of a kid who had a heart transplant, which I have, and another kid sees that and says, wow, it's not that bad. That kid went through it. I can get my heart transplant or heart operation. We've done our job of being able to educate and help other people who are probably fearful. Real quick, one story. We just did it. We're doing a story of this young kid here in San Diego, and I could share their story. But he's a basketball player at a local high school here in San Diego, and he has this condition. It's a weird name, but it's called sweaty palms. This kid is a star basketball player, and he's playing basketball, and his hands are dripping of sweat because it's a weird condition. I don't remember the exact name, but anyway, I met the family. We've done some magazine stories and some PR stories, and the mom is just thankful that we have been able to share that story, because now that kid, to be honest with you, at his high school, after he was in our magazine, he's a 17-year-old kid, has been able to share his experience. And now 3 or 4 other kids came up to the kid and say, you know what, I have the same condition. And I'm glad you shared your story, because I need help and I didn't know where to go and what to do. I was embarrassed. I'm 17 years old. I don't want no one to know that I have this condition. So this young kid, I've been talking to the mom just the other day, because they're going to be sharing their story on media. That's what I mean by being able to make an impact. We're helping other people who may have the same condition, who don't know what to do, or are afraid or embarrassed. Now they have a resource. Now this kid is an advocate for helping other kids. And so that's what I enjoy about my job. I'm not just a PR guy, but I'm a PR guy at a major children's hospital.
That's an outstanding story, and I'm glad that you shared that. We're going to start to wrap things up, but before we do, let's go to the challenges. What would you say would be the most challenging aspects of your job, where you really have to take a deep breath and really think through what the strategy is going to be, especially if there's something that might be controversial?
I take deep breaths every day, because I'm running like a television news reporter in my head. Yeah, I think you asked me that question earlier, because I'm built like a TV reporter. I think like a news guy. And, I think it's a great story, but sometimes I have to step back and say, wow, I got to see the bigger picture, because this could have a bad impact on us. But, I've learned so much in the last 16 years of doing PR, Josh, that now I have to think about when I pitch a story, or I'm giving the story to a reporter, because I have to figure out what the ramifications could be, what the impact could be for us, because someone could always spin a good story into something negative. Mm-hmm. So, and also educating the people that I work with about media, and having them understand what media is, how it works, because Josh, everyone thinks they're an expert. They know media. Oh, I was on TV once. I know how to do it now. Well, that doesn't work that way, right? It takes a certain skill. What you and I do on a daily basis, we're communicators, right? We have to learn how to communicate with people. And so we have to educate the people that we work with. Maybe that's not a good idea. We should do it this way. It's hard. It's hard because, when you are in the news industry, in the journalism field, it's all about, no, it's going to be this way. It's going to be that way. But sometimes when you're on the PR side, it's like, it can't be that way. And they don't understand what we do on a daily basis, how news works, that the story needs to be done at 5 o'clock, that you need to respond to the reporter fast enough, quick enough, because if you don't get your statement in, or your quote, or what have you, then that story could have a negative impact on you. So it's educating people really about what we do.
Well, Carlos, you've had this prolific career on both sides, and we could spend hours and hours talking about all the different stops, but I want to kind of close by just giving you the floor of a question that I should have asked, or something from San Diego State that has popped into your mind that has impacted you, to kind of wrap things up here about your career and how San Diego State impacted your career.
San Diego State is a great university. I'm very proud to call myself an Aztec, an alumni of that university. I'm very proud of where they are taking this program. A lot of great people, a lot of good people, a lot of good friends. I can name them for you.
Go ahead, name them.
Raj Mathai, Alicia Summers. I mean, there's so many people that I could just go and name. Shannon Handy, a good friend of mine at CBS8. There's just so many people. Salvador Rivera over at Fox 5. There's just so many people, both on the PR side and on the TV side, that have graduated from that university, that are doing big things, that are, across the country, working in the networks, working major newspapers, PR agencies in New York, Chicago, San Francisco. So there are so many people that can go back and say, I graduated from San Diego State. I'm an Aztec, and I'm very proud to call myself an Aztec, because we are very united. There's so many people that I'm connected with, and Temple over there is trying to do a good job of trying to get people together to really make this a strong program. I know it's their baby steps to it. We're all busy. We're all in different parts of our lives and careers, but there are some amazing people. My Raj Mathai, I worked with him in Yuma. He was my sports anchor, right? You know who he is. Raj Mathai is a very big name in the Bay Area, main anchor at the NBC station. Then I worked with him in Fresno, a competing station. So, one thing about Raj, I was on this Zoom call recently, and I said, "Is that Raj?" And he looked at me and he says, I don't know where Raj Mathai got this, but he would always call me Long Legs Delgado. And I'm like, but I don't have long legs, Raj. But I've known Raj since the 90s. We went to school together. He graduated earlier, but we've worked in two different markets and two different same stations. But there's just people that, I see when I go to different parts of the country. I'm like, oh, that's a San Diego State alumni. So our name is out there as graduates from that university. And I think, we've had good leadership at that university. There's great people that are doing good things, that are trying to give back. And it's just a great campus. I'm very proud, again, as I said, to say that I went to San Diego State.
Well, I appreciate all of the names that you just gave as you were bragging. We like to close out the podcast by brag about alums. I'm going to ask a favor, since you are in PR and you do pitch stories. Pitch these alums to me to be future guests on the podcast. We've had Raj on, but send me an email, give me some more background about them so that we can have them on as a future podcast guest. And then for the alum who I'm going to brag about, Carlos is not the only San Diego State alum who works in media relations and communications at a children's hospital. I also want to highlight Rachel Fowler. I believe that she attended San Diego State in the 2010s. She works for Children's Hospital of Colorado. She has been there now for 3 years. Before that, she was with Salvation Army. She moved from San Diego to Denver. It looks like about 3 or 4 years ago. And so, yes, there are 2 San Diego State alums who are working at children's hospitals and doing wonderful things in PR.
I'm going to connect with her because I remember her here locally, but I didn't know that she was there. But I'm going to send you a list of like 20 people, and you just handpick who you want, because there are so many people that are making so many different impacts all over the country, and they're proud Aztec. So you pick who you want. I'm just sending you some names. I'm a PR guy, right?
Yep, exactly. Send me the list. I'll add them to my huge spreadsheet. I can never get enough of them. It's fun connecting with different alums, and it was fun connecting with you, Carlos. Yep. Thanks so much for being generous with your time and all of the great stories that you told. I especially love the one about the canine therapy dogs. That was really cool.
Google it, man. Google it. You'll find it. And for those listening, if I could say one last thing, you're doing an amazing thing as well. I mean, you just got me with the idea, like, I need to do the exact same you're doing. I like these podcasts. Kind of fun, right? You get to have fun. It's not like you're on live television. You have to be serious. It's like, this is fun. So thanks for doing what you're doing and highlighting these amazing people.
Appreciate that, Carlos. Again, that is Carlos Delgado, Rady Childrens Hospital. My name is Josh Sushan. I'm the host of the Where You At podcast. And whether you're a student or alum, get involved, reach out to Carlos, reach out to me. If you're an alum, we'll take your money. We will take your time. We'll take your expertise, do some one-on-one mentoring. I did a Zoom. I talked to students on a Zoom just yesterday, and it was super fun answering their questions. And I know there's a lot of professors who would love to hear from other alums as well. So get involved in the university and continue to make this university grow. Once again, this is the Where You At podcast. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms, in person, or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.